We got one of the great guys in Bayfield to come in today and talk a little bit about the schooner ships and steamers that ply these waters, the Great Schwamigan Bay, the western end of Lake Superior, Ashland Harbor, in this area. So who better to bring in to do a presentation than the president of the Bayfield Maritime Museum. So anyway, a little bit about retired Northland College professor. He is a professional photographer by trade. So how fitting is that? Teacher and a pro at hand. And then he's a wooden boat builder. Don was also a volunteer here at BHA in 1976 in the early years. He's the chairperson of the Bayfield Carnegie Library Board. So Don wears many hats. Again, he's a really good little boat builder. I've seen some of his work there to kill for. And now he's the historian also of the Bayfield Maritime Museum. And with that in mind, I just want to take 1 second and say thank you, Don, and then hand the wand over to the harbor master here. Okay?
You know, after last month's lecture by none other than Bob Nelson, a lot of people came up to me and said, you have a hard act to follow, and I agreed with them. So let me start off by saying I'm really proud to be a member of the John Matthew Black presentations at BHA. Thanks to the AIHPC for sponsoring these events. And thanks to Bob for all of his help in twisting my arm, number one, and giving me a lot of background information and photographs to share with this presentation today. The other person I want to thank, and I have to thank Bill Gover, who has just been a phenomenal resource at the Mike's Research Center downstairs here at BHA. Thanks, Bill. I really appreciate it. I'm going to just say a couple words before we get started. I hope this isn't going to eat too much into my time in the presentation. I'm a little nervous about how long this is going to take. I will try to be done here in 60 minutes once I get going, but we'll see, okay? Just bear with me. I have a lot of stories to tell. Of the many hats I wear, being a historian is not the primary one in my view. I consider myself first and foremost a volunteer. I look around this room and there are a lot of historians in this room and people who know the boats of this area a lot better than I do, including some of the musicians who are here and are true historians. So I put that out as a disclaimer in the beginning. I'm also not going to talk about fish tugs or yachts. So if you hear about that, then sorry, I'm going to disappoint you. I'm going to talk about sail and steam vessels, and it's no small task to take on a topic like that, I'll tell you. How do you organize a talk like this? How would you begin? I initially began by trying to think I could do a comprehensive chronological talk about all the boats and ships of this area. Boy, was that a lousy idea. Pages that I've thrown out of my presentation, you'll understand why. I'm going to be speaking more or less chronologically, but I also segregated this by schooners first and then steamboats second. So obviously there'll be some overlap in timing, so chronology won't be exactly 100% accurate either. Let's have the lights on, if you would, please. I'll give you a sense of my outline so that I can shape your expectations, if you will. I'm going to give a little nod to the canoe and the Mackinac, which were so ubiquitous on these lakes, first of all. And then I'll go to the earliest vessels on Lake Superior, very back in the 18th century and then into the early 19th century. Then I'm going to give you some stories about ship-to-port and people-to-ship connections, really stories that have been documented by people like Eleanor Knight, the Bayfield County Press, and other sources. And the most important thing I can give to you at the beginning of this talk today is this one. You are safe if you stay on shore. This is not a way of saying, I'm not saying don't go out in a ship or a schooner. Believe me, I think it's great, but pick your days carefully, as you'll see in this presentation. And then I'm going to give you some glimpses of what life is like on the Great Lakes in this period. I had to put this into a framework of 1800 to 1900 because there's just too much to talk about. Here is my bibliography, just to give you a sense. I'm not going to go through this page by page, but just to let you know I've consulted a number of resources to try to put this talk together, both in hard copy form and on the internet, as well as a number of websites. I put it in the presentation so it was here documented in case we want to refer to any of these things later on. So let's start by giving our nod to the canoe, the birch bark canoe. What a fabulous vessel this is. It was lightweight. It was built by the people of the woods, in the woods, using materials they found right there and a little bit of skill. And by golly, they had a great little boat. They could take on inland lakes, they could take on Lake Superior, they could haul fish, they could haul people. A marvelous tool. If you just look at the comparison of the different kinds of Algonquin bark canoes, the Ojibwe canoe is right there in the middle. The one thing I want to point out about it is just the shape, oops, in the right direction here, the shape of the bow and the shape of the stern, rounded outer edge. And compare that to the other canoes, you'll see they're all a little bit different, so you know that that's the kind of shape we're talking about in the Chippewa or Ojibwe bark canoe. Lightweight, you could carry it right down to the water, put it in, take your paddle, hop in and go. What a fabulous tool. Compare that to the Mackinac. When the Mackinac came into the Great Lakes, it was based somewhat loosely on the bateau from the British government. It had a whole set of plans of what a bateau was. But the sail rig and the treatment of the Mackinac was pretty common throughout the Great Lakes. A little bit of a deck, generally 2 masts, had the gaffs at the top and the booms at the bottom to keep that sail outstretched. Extremely maneuverable. They could go just about anywhere. They could head upwind, and guess what? They could carry a lot of cargo, a lot of people, a lot of fish. They were extremely versatile. This is, I believe, one of Louis' photographs from Sand Island, Fred Hansen of the tiller. If you look at the Mackinac type on the Canadian 12-cent stamp, for example, you can see the shape of the sails there with the gaffs on top, the 2 masts, the jib in the foreground with hanging off a bowsprit. And note in this particular example, the bow is a perfectly plumb stem. It doesn't have a curve either outward or inward. It's just a plumb stem. The boats at the bottom is a collection of Mackinacs that was at Collingwood on Lake Huron, the bottom of Georgian Bay. But I love the photograph because somebody took a lot of effort and time to put all those sails up as a photographer. I thought, yes, what a great opportunity. But it just gives you an idea of how ubiquitous those Mackinacs were on all the Great Lakes. Here in the Apostle Islands, you had a Mackinac coming out from shore, just about to pass a small rowboat. And the thing about the Mackinac is that I think it started to evolve into the schooner, or maybe vice versa, who knows. But you can also start to look at Mackinacs and schooners in the same phrase, The Mackinac is a type. You'd have to have a very keen designer's eye for a boat to figure out what a Mackinac is, as opposed to what a schooner might be. But the Mackinacs were so ubiquitous, they were pulled up on shore. This is down at the Bayfield Harbor here, just down the street, 1898. The TH camp in the background here. Not an easy thing to pull them up on shore, but at least they could be gotten out of the water and out of the ice for the winter. This is a nice photograph off Madeline Island of a couple of, what, Mackinacs? Schooners. I would call the one on the right a Mackinac and the one on the left a schooner. But you can easily see how confusing that can be. I mean, if you're not trained in that area, it would be hard to say which is which. The schooners are generally a little bit bigger and obviously carry a good deal more cargo. If you look carefully at how people have analyzed the schooner type, you can see lots of different varieties of sails, the way that they were rigged. In this example, it's got the bowsprit on the front, but here it's got a bow that's curved backwards. Just the opposite of the Ojibwe, curving inward toward the stern from the bow. That's called a clipper bow, and we'll see a couple other examples of that as we go along. So the schooner type, where did the word schooner come from? Well, there's a little controversy on the internet about where the word schooner came from, but the best example I can offer is that somebody saw one moving along the water and said, "Oh, see how it spoons." And C-H-O-O-N meant that something's skipping across the water. And I think, for me, a schooner like this looks like it's skipping across the water, partly because it moves pretty quickly through the water, number one. But number two, it has this sort of raking forward view, so it's like a big arrow, just aesthetically or visually looking at the boat. It seems to be moving faster than it actually might be moving. Typical 2-masted schooner has the second mast taller than the first mast. so the height of it even has an angle down toward the bow of the boat. That's fairly typical of what a schooner might be. What brought schooners to this region? Copper and fur. The very first mining boom in the United States, copper. Fur quickly followed after that because copper was kind of hard to get to, but the furs from the animals, you could get those pretty easily. This is a painting by Howard Sievertson, a commercial fishing family from Isle Royale up on the North Shore. Howard is still alive and painting and has a couple of galleries on the North Shore. And he published a book called Skiffs, Steamers, and Schooners, I think, something like that. In this painting, he's depicted what I would say is you could call it a Mackinaw, you could also call it a schooner. No matter what you call it, it seems to be a little funny in the way the size of the sails are in proportion to the rest of the boat, but that's a different story. But look what's happened to the canoe. The bark canoe has become elongated, it carries a great deal more cargo, in this case 10 people in one large birch bark canoe. Again, what a fabulous invention that the birch bark canoe was. What brought furs and copper of interest to this region? There's a gentleman who worked on Madeline Island in the 1730s by the name of Louis Denis de la Ronde, the first French commander of the French fort on Madeline Island. And one of the things he did on Lake Superior was to build a schooner, a vessel of 80 tons above St. Mary's Fall here at the Sioux. In 1731, he brought the rigging from the lower lakes, brought it over the portage, built the boat on Lake Superior, and then used it for his copper excursions on the Keweenaw Peninsula. He didn't last very long because he died in 1741, and this is interesting. His wife took over the commanding of the French post on Madeline Island. There's an interesting story I'd like to dig more into, but that's going to take me longer than I had. Alexander Henry is also said to have built a small schooner that was for the copper trade, and when it went bust was used by the fur trade as well. But between 1802 and 1812, the British Northwest Company built 4 vessels on Lake Superior: the Perseverance, the Mink, the Nancy, and the Recovery. Here's another Sievertson painting this of the Recovery, which is an interesting story because it was one of the 4 British boats that they put into hiding on Isle Royale. This is on the northeast end of Isle Royale. They covered it with brush, put it in a little harbor, let it freeze in the winter, so those darn Americans didn't come along and take it, because the Americans captured all 3 of the other boats. The Recovery was not taken because it was hidden so nicely away. There is conflicting information in the record about whether or not Recovery may have been used by Lieutenant Bayfield in his survey of Lake Superior in 1820. Other people have said it was the Bullfrog, other people said it was even the Mink, but nobody's really quite sure. It may have been used by Lieutenant Bayfield, we're not entirely sure. In 1829, it was run over the rapids at the Sioux and successfully served at the lower lakes for a period of time after that. 4 days and 200 years ago from today, the War of 1812 ended with the Treaty of Ghent. And I'm not going to go into the whole history of that, except to say that one of the things, it did 2 things. One, it meant that Americans could if you weren't American, you could not trade in this part of Lake Superior. In other words, foreigners could not trade on Lake Superior with American ports. That's one of the outcomes. The other is that the borderline between Canada and the United States was established at the Pigeon River. So the great fur company at Grand Portage was moved up to the Kaministiquia River up by Thunder Bay now in Canadian territory. Here's Sievertson's depiction of Fort William. And it has a whole variety of boats with a good sized Mackinaw or rowing type boat on the left, a schooner in the foreground. This could be a depiction of a boat somewhat artistically implied. There was a boat called the Fur Trader that was built in 1812 for the American Fur Company. John Jacob Astor was the first American vessel on Lake Superior. Built the materials were assembled at Black River, Ohio, and then it was built in 1835 above St. Mary's Falls. So St. Mary's Falls were a real problem getting boats up here on Lake Superior. You either had portage boats around the falls or transport the materials and then build it on the lake. The materials came out of Black River, Ohio, and were brought up to the Sioux on the schooner the Bridget. And And then under the direction of Ramsey Crooks, placed in the command of a captain named Charles Stannard. Anybody hear of Stannard? Stannard Rock. You bet. He's the one who discovered that big rock 44 miles north of Marquette in Lake Superior, so they named it after him. After 1842, Captain John Angus took the helm of the John Jacob Astor, and on September 19th of 1844 was landing supplies at Keweenaw, Copper Harbor, to build Fort Wilkins. Guess what? September, Lake Superior, storm came up, blew the ship ashore. They were able to take all the materials off the John Jacob Astor and build the fort. But then the wind shifted, took the boat out to the sea a little bit, but then brought it right back and smashed it on the rocks. And poor Captain Angus, all he could do was to see the ship break apart on the rocks. That was the first American shipwreck on Lake Superior, John Jacob Astor. What was life like in the 1830s on Lake Superior? Well, we have a glimpse of it from Reverend Sherman Hall, who came to Madeline Island in 1831. He came here between August and September of that year. He said, "A person traveling to this region is obliged to submit to many inconveniences. Here the traveler must take his bed, his house, his provisions, his utensils to cook them, and everything along with him, or consent to sleep in the open air, on the ground, and to subsist on what the woods and the waters may chance to afford. There are no New England taverns to which the traveler can rest when he is weary and find supplies for all his wants." Life is hard. The first vessel to be hauled around the Sault Ste. Marie locks to Lake Superior was the Algonquin. This schooner was about 55 feet in length. Materials were, the boat was built at the Cleveland Northwestern Lake Company in Black River, which is now Lorain, Ohio. And it took 3 months to bring it around the portage because it could only travel about 5 boat lengths in a day. And so it took about 3 months to go the 2 miles or so to get the Algonquin there. Once it was on Lake Superior, it was the only ship of its type working the lakes since the Astor was wrecked in 1844. Its first port of call, La Pointe. To close the 1841 season, Captain Jack Wilson commanded the Algonquin as it left La Pointe to go to Sioux for the winter. It being early November, the schooner ran into a gale off Keweenaw Point. Now imagine this. You're on a schooner, you're on Lake Superior, it's November 1841. It's snowing like crazy. You have no lighthouses, no navigation equipment. You are doing it just by, what, feel? Well, he kind of knew which way was out in the open lake, so he went out in the open lake as best he could. And even by the next morning, there was absolutely zero visibility. And he realized that he was still sailing pretty hardily. He had to do something. So he ordered the crew to take down the mainmast. And then first one crew member and then another crew member tried to climb the icy rigging to chop down the sails. And they both failed. They all failed. Captain Wilson himself finally strapped an axe to his body with a sash, climbed the rigging, chopped away, and dropped the mainmast, and then came back down completely exhausted. And just in time, because the light of the fog started to lift a little bit, and they saw the rocks of Grand Island just off Munising. The boat was okay. Captain Wilson was just dead on his feet. He fell unconscious. They took him to his cabin. They roused him with a good fire and a bunch of blankets, and the first thing he said when he woke up was, "Boys, are you all right?" Well, they were. The Algonquin was safe. He took the Algonquin later in the story of the Ontonagon Boulder. Do you know about this story? This mythical, legendary, large piece of float copper found on the Ontonagon River in Keweenaw. Some people thought it was hyped a little bit too much and contributed to the copper rush on the Keweenaw. But others said it's a pretty incredible piece. The natives obviously knew about it. Well, anyway, they got the boulder onto a Mackintosh boat and rowed it down the river and put it on board the Algonquin. And the Algonquin took it to the Sault Ste. Marie. And then from Sault Ste. Marie went to Detroit. Detroit finally went to Washington, D.C., where it now resides. It is the 3,700-pound piece of float copper. And you can see why it would fuel such interest in the copper trade. In 1851, the Algonquin struck a floating log near Eagle Harbor, developed a leak, and began to sink. With great difficulty, the vessel made it to Eagle Harbor, and it was repaired and served for another several years before it was finally scuttled in Superior. In 1863, John Barden in Superior wanted to raise the Aqua Timbers out of the mud and use the wood to build a yacht. But unfortunately, he got the wood out, but sort of a lot of other people came along and took the wood and made canes and furniture and tables and things, so he never got his yacht out of it. Poor man. The Algonquin is said to be the first scheduled ship to come to Bayfield when it was on the lakes. In 1855, something really tremendous happened at Lake Superior, and that was the opening of the Soo Locks. One of the boats that came through the Soo Locks in 1855 was the Ellis Craig. We don't have a good picture of the Ellis Craig. I think you saw that in Bob's talk last month when he was talking about commercial fishing. 63 feet, built in Milton, Ohio. This is not the Craig, this is one I would imagine is somewhat similar to the Ellis Craig. In 1858, it was stationed in Marquette because it was built as a revenue cutter. So the U.S. Revenue Service put it in service at Marquette, retired it in 1864. It went to the Sioux where it was named the Ellis Craig. Then it moved to Chicago in 1866, was wrecked in a storm in November 1869, raised and purchased by Nelson and Frank Bataan, in which the Bayfield Press on October 20th of 1870 said, Ellis Craig brought into port 500 half barrels of whitefish and trout. November 1872 was damaged in a storm near Duluth and rebuilt in 1877 and returned to Bayfield in 1879. You're going to hear me do this a lot with some of these ships, list the wrecking history of each one. This is part of my theme, as you can tell. Bayfield Press, November 27, 1880. Last Saturday night, November 20th, Nelson and Frank Bataan staunched the little fishing schooner Ellis Craig under Captain Murphy. Sailed from Duluth with over 50 tons of flour, feed, pork, oil, and general merchandise. A telegram received here announcing her sailing with a frozen centerboard. The next we heard from her was from Joe Bataan, one of her crew, who arrived here in a small boat Monday afternoon, news that the vessel was ashore on the northeast side of Wilson's Island. His feet were badly frozen when he got here. 7 years later, one more quick story about the Craig. It was wrecked between Sand River and Raspberry Bay. The Astor Press reported that, quote, the crew got lost in a blinding snowstorm, and after wandering about in the woods for several hours with their clothing covered in ice and almost perishing from cold and hunger, the crew, with the exception of Captain Bunker, reached Bayfield and reported that the captain had laid down in the snow to die, having become so exhausted that he could not walk. The others were so worn out that they could not help him. A rescuing party was at once organized, and after a long search, they found the captain. He was insensible, and his limbs were badly frozen. He was brought to Bayfield, and there were little hopes of his recovery. Well, in fact, he did recover, and went on to be captain of some other vessels later on. One of the things these schooners were used for, besides fishing trade, was the quarry trade. Pauline Brownstone off the islands. This is a representation of the CUL, or the UTEL, which also, in addition to taking quarried stone down the lakes, brought lumber up to Silver Island. The Starlight, this is not actually the Starlight, but the Starlight was another schooner that we know quite well, because June 21st, 1871, the Bayfield Press said, the two-masted schooner loaded 500 tons of brownstone for the Milwaukee courthouse. And it was easy to ship this brownstone from the islands because you could pull the boat up to the rocks, and then they winch this stuff over to the schooner and take it down the lakes. December 23rd, 1871, the schooner Mary Ann sailed from Bayfield for Duluth, encountered a terrible blizzard, and was obliged to turn back to the islands for shelter. By extraordinary good luck, she was running between Raspberry and York Islands during the night, where she found safe anchorage. She was completely covered in ice, which formed when the waves breaking over her deck. The next morning, she was packed in icebergs as far as the eye could reach. She will, of course, winter where she lies. The Maple Leaf. As far as I know, this is the only photograph of the Maple Leaf that we could find. Built right here in Bayfield, 1872, under the ownership of R.D. Pike. built by Old Bergman, a two-masted schooner and one of the earliest schooners that scraped with Isle oil. According to Frederick Stonehouse, the schooner was driven ashore during the gale somewhere on the island's south coast. Crew was rescued, but the sails, the rigging, the masts, and the cabin all were washed away. The boat was rebuilt. R.D. Pike used it for another 10 years until it was finally lost in Michigan's Eye River in 1882. Harvey Hearse, some of you may remember Harvey Hearse, had a story that was published by Elmer Knight about the Maple Leaf. He said, the Maple Leaf was nearly always late in making the return trip in the fall, which several times was the cause of much anxiety on the part of our Bayfield citizens. One time we were anxiously waiting for a return. It was very late and there had been bad storms on the bay, and the bay was freezing. Nearly everyone was asking, will the Maple Leaf get in? The next morning, Father called me to look out the window, and there, some 200 feet from the dock, was the Maple Leaf, frozen in the ice. The old captain could get her no further, and the next morning a channel was cut, and she was pulled to the dock. Captain Nils Larson had helped build the schooner, and had sailed the Maple Leaf for 10 years. Later, he took the helm of the Grey Oak, another one of R.D. Pike's vessels, and did that for 2 years before he finally caught a job as the foreman of the Bayfield Brownstone Company. One of the grandest lake schooners of the 1870s was built at the Wolf and Davidson shipyard in Milwaukee, the Moonlight. 213 feet long, 777 tons, a three-masted schooner under the command of Captain Denis Sullivan, an Irish native. The Moonlight hauled cargoes of up to 1,400 tons and moved them so fast that the schooner gained a reputation as the Queen of the Lakes. Sullivan commanded the Moonlight for a total of 11 years. In the fall of 1895, the Moonlight and another barge, the H.A. Kent, were in a storm that drove the two schooners and the steamship that was towing them ashore near Marquette. The Kershaw broke in two and sunk. It was a total wreck. But both the Kent and Moonlight came ashore and both vessels were able to be repaired. The Moonlight was salvaged the following year and remained on the lakes in under 6 years, serving as an ore carrier from Lake Superior ports all across the western end of the lake. Until 1903, when a storm claimed her, guess where, in the Apostle Islands. Sports divers located the Moonlight in 2005, and she's in 235 feet of water, about 7 miles east of Michigan Island. Last Sunday was a grand turnout for sailboats, said the Ashland Press of 1877. We counted 18 in sight of the Inglis dock at 3 in the afternoon. Well, perhaps one of those schooners that the Ashland Press spotted was one of Bob's favorite schooners, the Louisa. The Louisa here at the Bayfield dock, owned by E. Fennelly in Ashland. The Bayfield Press reported that Captain Atwood returned from 2 weeks stop in Milwaukee and Chicago and other ports on Lake Michigan, where he purchased the schooner Louisa, 40 tons and burden in command of Captain Murphy. On May 9, 1885, just 2 years later, Louisa's for sale. And 2 years after that, 1897, Louisa is lost. And that's all we know of Louisa. The Grey Oak, I mentioned it before, again, this is not a picture of the Grey Oak, but one perhaps similar to what the Grey Oak looked like. Built in Bayfield, June 20, 1885 by R.G. Pike. The Bayfield County Press kept really good tabs on the building of the Grey Oak. On November 22, 1884, it said it was going to be a ship of 100 feet. December 13th, Bayfield Grey Oak and materials are becoming famous for shipbuilding purposes. Here's some markers for you. March 14th, Captain Pike's mill has run out a lot of planking for his new barge, which he's christened the Grey Oak, in honor of the Grey Oak, of which it is constructed, and which the builders say is as fine an oak for shipbuilding purposes as the county affords. The Bayfield Press said that the Ashland Press had given the Grey Oak a favorable account, but had said that it was an error, stating that the oak for which it was constructed was taken from Oak Island. It was not. It was taken from a mile inland from the Bayfield shore. Captain R.D. Pike's new barge, the Grey Oak, was launched June 20, 1885, and will soon be ready for business. In the construction of this barge, Captain Pike has given renewed evidence of his enterprise and again demonstrates the fact that where there's a will, there's a way. That seemed to be the motto for R.D. Pike, a man of great enterprise in this community. After about a quarter of a century of service, the Gray Oak was finally scuttled near the Welcome Islands in the Canadian waters in 1911. There's the Gray Oak down the bottom, still visible. It's sad enough to see worn-out vessels scuttled, I think, but when a vessel founders and sailors die, it's truly tragic. And the one shipwreck of a schooner near here that's probably the most famous is the story of the Lucerne. Well, this is the chilliest picture. It's a drawing that's often credited with being the Lucerne. But the Lucerne was documented as a two-masted ship, and that sure looks like a three-masted schooner to me, so go figure. Lucerne was 195 feet long, truly majestic. Notice the bow on it. It has that clipper bow, pointing outward toward the jib, a very jaunty jib. It's a bowsprit up the front there. Had numerous owners in its 13 short years, but on November 12th, note the date, November again, 1886, Lucerne offloaded its cargo of coal and washburn and then set sail for Ashton, where it picked up iron ore, a total of almost 1,200 tons, to be delivered to Cleveland for the last run of the season. It left Ashland the next day in a perfectly figured winter's day for November. And then around 4 p.m., according to the observers on the steam tug, the Fred Kelly, it was encountering a gale off the Alton coast, the Kimono coast. At dusk, the Lucerne had put about in the storm and was sailing back toward Schwalmingen Bay to try to get to shelter, and finally dropped its anchors right near Long Island. What happened when it dropped anchors is apparently it was in too shallow water, and the centerboard trunk and the heavy seas combined to break open seams in the bottom of the boat. Water filled the boat. She started to sink in the shallow waves. As the ship finally went beneath the waters, some of the sailors tried climbing into the rigging to save themselves. And the next day, of course, was a gruesome sight because the lighthouse keeper at Long Island noted that the cabin of the Lucerne was completely gone, drifting near shore, and in the rigging were the dead men covered in 1 to 6 inches of ice. There's a chilling thought. The S.B. Barker and the Cyclone were dispatched from Bayfield to cut down the dead men and brought back to Bayfield to the undertakers. Today, the remains of the Lucerne remain in about 24 feet of water off the northeast coast of Long Island, and the hull is still remarkably intact. The iron ore cargo that she was hauling is still on the bottom of the lake. Apparently, you can still see it if you dive down there. This is an interesting photograph of one of the capstans that raised the sails on the Lucerne, and one of the other captains was taken off the boat by some divers back in the 60s or 70s, and we have it at the Bayfield Maritime Museum now. In more pleasant circumstances, in the late part of the 19th century, there was a boat, this schooner, the Lizzie W. from Madeline Island, Captain Daniel Russell Angus at the helm. A lovely little boat, pretty little sight to see the Lizzie W. out of the water in these parts. Beautiful fantail stern, great big sails, lots of sail power in that vessel that kept going by. Captain Angus's father, by the way, was an early lighthouse keeper at Long Island and an early settler of Ashton. By this time, in the late 1880s, steamers started to take more and more predominance on the lake. The Bayfield Press, June 11, 1887. The schooner Belle Stevenson is in port several hours Monday. Steamboat arrivals and departures are becoming too numerous to mention. A year later, on July 31, 1878, the press reported there were 14 arrivals of steamboats at the port of Bayfield. In 1884, Bayfield's marina consisted of 4 steam tugs, 2 schooners, 2 yachts, and 50 to 60 fishing smacks, which I assume he means Mackintosh. Steamers, just a couple words about steamers before I get into talking about the ones that were around here. They started to be developed in the 1830s. They were developed for their speed and efficiency, and safety. And you had three basic kinds of steamers. You had the paddle wheel steamers with these great, big, enormous 11-foot reach piston-driven paddles. And the paddles were the paddles on the side. And if you think about a paddle wheel, you know, it's like dipping an oar in the water. You're pushing water one at a time. But with the wheel, you've got like maybe 1% or 10% of the paddle power in the water at one time. The other 90% is out of the water, but you still have to turn on that weight. So they're ultimately quite inefficient. The second kind of steamer you had were the palace steamers, with very elegant accommodations, lavishly outfitted with chandeliers and stained glass and plush carpeting and rosewood furnishings. There was one quote that described a palace steamer, and I don't recall the name of which one this is. I think this might be the steamer of the city of Detroit or city of Buffalo, one of those big ones. The fairy palaces of the imagination were never so gorgeously furnished, nor could the famous barges of Cleopatra, with its silken sails, rival this noblest of steamers. Must have been fun to ride on some of these palace steamers. And the third kind of steamer are the propellers. Here they finally realized that, you know, if you want 100% pushing power, you put a screw, a propeller on the back of the boat and turn a shaft that drove the propeller to push it along. It not only made it more efficient, it cut the fuel consumption about a quarter, and it also allowed you to have much more room for passengers and cargo because you didn't have all this heavy machinery which took up the whole deck area of the big steamers. This is the Barker, by the way. The first steam craft to disturb the waters of Lake Superior did not come through the Ecoluxe, it came right by the Ecoluxe, the steamer Independence in 1845. So I don't have a picture of it, but we have this painting by Howard Sievertson again showing the Independence with a Mackinaw schooning by and a Chippewa canoe in the very forward part of this painting. Independence was 105 feet long, 200 tons, built in Chicago. Notice it carries sail, and trying to figure out why they had sails. And the nearest I could come to an explanation of why they carried sails is because they knew sailboats. They knew how to sail sailboats. They could rely on sailboats. They could not rely on steamers, at least not in the beginning. So they carried sail, I think, as a confidence thing, because it allowed them to have power when they might not otherwise have power. The Honorable Peter White of the UP said that the Independence always seemed in trouble. Neither steam nor wind, nor both, could make her go right. It went ashore at Eagle Harbor in its first year, burst a boiler, 1849, was completely destroyed in a boiler explosion in Sault Ste. Marie on November 22nd, 1854. Another writer said, we steamed up the lake, and the first place we touched at was Copper Harbor, or Fort Leavenworth, where we found a small garrison and several huts. After stops at the Eagle River, we shaped our course for La Pointe, but had to turn about and run before the wind. We made for the lee of the Keweenaw Point and lay by for 3 or 4 days. We again set sail, reached Eagle River, and steamed to La Pointe, where we gave the natives a dreadful scare with the appearance of our craft and the noise of our steam whistle. I can imagine what that must have looked like to people who had lived here before. The Illinois side wheel steamer, you can see the big paddles on the side of the Illinois, 268 feet in length, could carry 800,000 board feet of lumber, built in 1853, was the first vessel through the Ecoluxe, June 18th, 1855. And like so many of these other ships we've been talking about, the Illinois was no stranger to trouble. 1854, ashore at Thunder Bay Island in Lake Huron. 1857, colliding with a schooner on the St. Clair River. 1857, engine broke at Copper Harbor, towed to Detroit. 1858, ashore at Copper Harbor. 1860, struck by the schooner Grace Greenwood on the Detroit River. 1860, struck a rock and went ashore at Eagle Harbor, Michigan. 1864, struck the reef at Eagle Harbor and sank, recovered a week later. November 1869, broke in two and sank.
We should rename them the Lucky after that.
The Sam Ward. This view kind of gives a good a good impression of what the mechanics look like with those big paddle wheels on the side and the engine on the deck. 1855 was the first steamer to carry people to Ashland, and it came from La Pointe to Ashland, delivery people there. The North Star, built 1854 for the Cliffs Mining Company and their Lake Superior line, a slide-wheel steamer with 2 decks, 260 feet in length. Okay, here we go again. 1854, collided with a tug on Lake Huron. 1856, damaged machinery at Keweenaw Point. 1856, collided with the steamer William Wallace. 1859, damaged in a gale. 1860, struck the rocks in St. Mary's River. 1862, burned. This is a wild place. I don't know what it would have been like to really be on these things, but it doesn't sound like a lot of fun. In the late 1940s, Harvey Hearse had another reminiscent, this one about the North Star. He said, there came a long, cold winter and supplies were running short, and they were finally reduced to 1 sack of corn with which Mrs. Austrian decided to keep for the family. The day came when there was just enough left to make 1 loaf of cornbread. She gave the children half of it for supper, but went to bed without trying any herself. About midnight, she was awakened by the cry of, "Steamboat! Steamboat!" And looking out the window, she saw the lights of the North Star approaching the dock. She immediately went downstairs and ate what was left of the cornbread. The Bayfield Mercury, April 18th, 1857. There is a regular line of large and commodious steamers running from Detroit to this place, one from Buffalo and another from Chicago. We think it is not too much to say that Bayfield, among other advantages, has the largest, safest, best harbor on the lake. The water is deep and it is easy access. Well, that was big words. But I think the question about safety, I don't know. I can't resist telling you the story of one of these PAL steamers that came to Bayfield pretty frequently, the Lady Elgin. Double-decked wooden sidewheel steamer built in Buffalo, 1851, named for the wife of Lord Elgin, the Governor of Canada. 252 feet in length, 54-inch cylinder with an 11-foot stroke that powered 2 32-foot paddle wheels. Had 200 cabin passengers, 100 deck passengers, 43 crew, and 800 tons of freight. Lady Elgin was an impressive boat. It was one of the larger steamers on the lake and was very popular due to her luxurious accommodations and quick speed. But the Lady Elgin was also, guess what, no stranger to accidents. 1854, punched a hole in her bottom on a large rock north of Milwaukee. 1858, driven on the rocks, Copper Harbor, repaired for $8,000. 1858, stranded on Ensemble Point Reef for 2 days until pulled off by the steamer Illinois. I love this, I don't know if you read this whole poster, but there's Lady Elgin at the bottom, but the Chippewa Indians, docile and predisposed for complaints. The 12 apostles, right. From the diary of James Pete, Friday, September 4th, 1857. The steamer Lady Elgin went aground off Schwangen Point. Evidently, people from Bayfield went out to help the grounded ship. For Mr. Pete went out in a small boat and stayed aboard all night. The Lady Elgin got off the sandbar shortly afterward, and he left on it that night for Superior. The boat fare was still $3. The deputy collector for the port of Bayfield at the time in 1859 was Andrew Tate, the local druggist who had a store downtown. And he kept a record of boat arrivals and departures. And when the steamer Lady Elgin left Bayfield on September 3rd, 1860, and was lost 5 days later, he wrote this in the port records. The steamer Lady Elgin ran regularly between Chicago and this place and was commanded by Captain Jack Wilson. She was run down by the schooner Augusta of Oswego. It occurred at 2:30 in the morning. Number of passengers and crew lost, supposed to be over 300. The captain lost. So the wreck of the Lady Elgin, even though it occurred on Lake Michigan, I think had a profound impact on people in Bayfield who knew and loved the boat, because this was their lifeline. The story of the sinking is kind of long and interesting, and I'll try to tell as quickly and succinctly as I can. 1860, slavery was a hot topic in political circles, and states' rights were also part of that. There was a group in Milwaukee called the Irish Union Guard, a militia group. And one of their leaders said something like he was not going to have his militia cause an insurrection and secede from the United States government if it came to that over states' right. And for making a remark like that, the entire Union Guard was de-armed, basically had their rifles and everything taken away from them. So they needed their spirits boosted, so they chartered the Lady Elgin to take them from Milwaukee to Chicago to attend a Democratic rally. 600 to 700 people got aboard the Lady Elgin and departed Chicago for the trip to Milwaukee. They spent the whole day at the rally, they had parties, some of them did a dance on the boat, had a great time, other people just went to bed, they were pretty tired. Meanwhile, this is, what's the date? September of 1860, a gale rises on Lake Michigan. And on the trip back, they encounter a terrible gale, and going along at 2:30 in the morning, they felt this tremendous jar. Well, there's the schooner Augustine, which is a lumber carrier, carrying a big cargo of lumber. All the lumber had shifted on the boat. The wind was just wild on the lake. It was running downwind, and it was running completely out of control. Even so, one of the crew members did see the lights of the Lady Elgin, reported that to the captain. The captain ignored it, and then until it got too close to the Lady Elgin, all of a sudden the captain yells, "Hard up! For God's sakes, hard up, man!" And the Augusta plunged into the port side of the Lady Elgin, puncturing a big hole in just aft of the paddle wheel. Believing they had just struck at a glancing bow, the Augustine kept on the lake and kept sailing and had full sail and just went straight down to Chicago. Never stopped, never offered any assistance whatsoever. Meanwhile, the Lady Elgin was complete pandemonium. They had 50 head of cattle on board, so they pushed them off the boat to try to lighten the load. They took the iron stoves that were part of the cargo and put them on the starboard side to try to lift the hull out of the water so it wouldn't sink quite so fast. Captain Wilson was pretty sure the boat would never make it to shore, but they tried to steer toward shore. A lifeboat was lowered with one crew member aboard, but no line. So as soon as they hit the water, it took off and had no connection to anybody else. The second lifeboat was put in the water, but leaked so badly it was completely worthless. Within 20 minutes, the Lady Elgin broke in half and went down stern first. The next morning, there was revelations of both heroism and tragedy. Captain Wilson, the same Captain Wilson who brought the Algonquin to Bayfield and survived that storm off Munising, was lost when he was trying to save two people as he was just coming into shore. Got smashed against some rocks and was killed just offshore. One survivor made it on the carcass of a dead cow. Another survivor made it by crawling into one of the base drums of the Union Guard and paddling that to shore. Another man climbed into a steamer trunk and made it to shore. There was a student from Northwestern University who saw what was happening and rushed down to help. And in the boiling surf, he's credited with rescuing 18 people out of the water. Even though he ended up becoming delirious, he kept asking, "Did I do enough? Did I do my best?" He was allegedly confined to a wheelchair for the rest of his life. The loss of 300 people in the wreck of the Lady Elgin was at the time the largest tragedy on all the Great Lakes at the time. It was only surpassed 100 years ago this year by the rolling over the Eastland in the Chicago River, which killed over 800 people. Iron shipbuilding by this time in 1860 was just starting to make a little progress on the lakes. It didn't really solidify on the lakes for another 20 years, but among the steel ships that visited Bayfield was the India, 210 feet in length, built at Buffalo, 1871 for the Lake Superior Transit Company to operate between Buffalo and Lake Superior ports. An iron propeller, so here it's not a side wheeler, it's a propeller in the back. Visited Bayfield for the first time on August 12th, 1871. It's one of the things that's interesting about researching these vessels is that these boats change names so often. I'll just give you a hint. It became known as the City of Ottawa in 1907. It was back to the India in 1927. Then it was named Sault Ste. Marie in 1929, back to India in 1930, and then scrapped in 1945. keeping track of these is pretty interesting. The sister ship to the India was the Japan. Guess what? 210 feet in length, built by the Lake Superior Transit Company in Buffalo, exactly the same as the India. It was also known as the city of Hamilton, the city of Walkerville for Roy Russell, the Japan, and the Russell Roy, the same ship. It was also the site of a rather unusual kind of wedding on Chequamegon Bay. Eleanor Knight tells the story. En route from Ashland to Bayfield, on August 26, 1891, Robert Inglis and Margaret Walton decided to marry in a quiet ceremony. Captain Robert Smith was enlisted to perform the ceremony once underway, and he had extended every courtesy which his magnificent steamer could afford. A hard storm sprang up just after leaving Ashland, but the surprised wedding guests gathered round despite the rocking of the boat. Just as the captain asked the groom to love and cherish, etc., the groom was thrown off balance and struck the preacher amidship, doubling him up. The clergyman rallied and extracted an affirmative answer to his question, and as he turned to the bride to ask the same, the ship took another lurch that sent her crashing forward, and her head struck the captain's shirt front. Suddenly he grew pale and adjourned the proceedings while he leaned over the rail. The guests were too sick themselves to enjoy a sumptuous repast prepared in honor of the new married. The Eva Wadsworth, pretty little 50-foot steamer built in 1871, owned by S.S. Vaughan. And it was the site of a rather short-lived tradition in 1878, again from Eleanor Knight. January 1, 1878, New Year's Day, Ashlanders came to visit Bayfield by boat. She sounded surprised. I don't know, maybe she wasn't surprised, but it sounded surprising to me. Captain Patrick of the Eva Wadsworth brought over about 30 Ashland citizens and the Ashland Silver Cornet Band on a warm New Year's Day, 1878. The Bayfield Guards were under the command of R.D. Pike. They met the Wadsworth. The old cannon was fired in salute, and a line of march was formed at the dock and headed up Washington Avenue to the Smith Hotel for dinner. The Ashland Daily Press picks up the rest of the story. Bayfield never looked better than it did, reclining on the snowless hillside, basking in the sunshine smiles of 1878. We noted bright pansies in the gardens, and fountains were spouting freely, and this pleasant resort looked as in summer. What a delightful turn of phrase it was to describe Bayfield on New Year's Day, 1878. The Wisconsin Central new passenger boat, the S.B. Barker, arrived from below and commenced making regular trips between Ashland and this place Thursday, said the Bayfield County Press, May 26, 1883. The Barker is a new boat. This being her second season, is 100 feet long, has a carrying capacity of 350 passengers, a large and finely furnished cabin, and can make 15 knots an hour. It was built 1882 in Grand Haven, Michigan, brought here by Frank Brower, owner, operated initially by the Wisconsin Central Railroad, and then eventually purchased by the Booth Company in 1893, and then later converted to a tug and renamed the Globe in 1918. She presented a handsome appearance, said the Bayfield Press. All her colors set in 4 large streamers with white ground and blue border, bearing in the center Bayfield, Ashland, Fossil Islands, Duluth. Barker had the distinction of landing the first crew of men on a rock on the north side of Chequamegon Bay, who cut the trees down to make a clearing to start building Washburn. Barker had frequent excursions to Devil's Island. Seemed to like to take people out to Devil's with this large natural landing area. Seemed just tailor-made for the Barker to drop off people in their fine Sunday best to gather on the rocks for a little bit to see the furthest of the islands. And here's a picture of Captain Angus aboard the Barker. Anderson aboard the Barker. July 5th, 1912. The steamer Barker of the Booth Line on the South Shore run between this city and the head of the lakes is kept busy these days conveying strawberries to Superior and Duluth markets. This was Bayfield, just after the turn of the century. Then this photo by Bert Hill, showing the elegant Island View Hotel, one of the reasons people came here in the late part of the 19th century. There's the Island View up there. Here's Washington Avenue, the Holy Family Convent. This is the Booth Cooperage and the Bayfield Transfer Station. And unfortunately, just off the edge over here would be my favorite name for a tavern in Bayfield, Bucket of Blood. It was in this location that one of the most popular of the steamers landed in Bayfield, the Manistee. Built in 1867, based in Milwaukee, 155 feet long, Captain John McKay, starting in 1873 for the Duluth and South Shore Transportation Company. Eleanor Knight says that everyone on the shore knew the sound of the Manistee whistle. One of the reasons the Manistee was remembered so well is because it would often pick up these bands in other communities and bring them to a different community, and then have a concert on the dock. The Bayfield Press reports frequent trips by the Ash and Silver Cornet Band, the Lake Linden Band, the Calumet Miners Band, brought to the Bayfield docks and have a little concert, and then McKay would run them back up to the Keweenaw. What a sweet thing to do, huh? The Manistee, Eleanor Knight continued, was more than a boat. She was a friend and a lifeline civilization for the pioneers of the Bayfield area. And she tells the story of her friend Marietta DeMars, who lived close to the dock at Bayfield. When the Manistee whistled for landing, she and a friend would run pigtails flying to see this fine vessel with beautiful staterooms and a parlor that had an actual piano. Captain McKay knew that and liked everybody in the little ports he visited, would often greet them, and one eventful day asked the girls if they would like a ride. They would, of course. The captain shouted orders, the lines were cast off, and the great Manistee with 2 little passengers back from the dock for a trip along the shore of Buffalo Bay and back. On Saturday, November 10th, 1883, the Propeller Manistee, carrying oats and merchandise, left Duluth for Ontonagon. On Sunday, it blew a living gale. November, what can you say? And the Manistee was in port at Bayfield, where it remained waiting for the storm to abate until Thursday. The Bayfield Press picks up the rest of the story. Thursday night, November 15th, at 9 o'clock. The weather promising favorable, Captain McKay decided to pull out for Ontonagon, first transferring a portion of the passengers to the city of Duluth. John Jacobs was an oiler on Peerless and later on the Eva Wadsworth, said, "I was in Bayfield on the night she left for that last faithful trip. I was aboard the Manistee for about an hour. Visiting with the crew, as I was acquainted with nearly all of them. I was on the dock when McKay gave a blast of the whistle to let go of the lines, and I can see her now backing out from the shelter of this dock and into that fearful storm. The Manistee was no fit boat to be out on Lake Superior in a storm like that, loaded to the guards as she was. The passenger's cabin was filled with furniture, making her top-heavy. I never saw Captain McKay again." 2 days later, Ontonagon lighthouse keeper James Corrigan reported that a freeze had hit very hard. The lighthouse beacon became entirely enveloped with ice. He recorded an early morning temperature of 5 degrees above zero, along with snow and wind. Still, there was no sign of the Manistee. Corrigan's entries over the next few days were peppered with anxiety about the vessel's fate. The tug Maytham began a search and was joined by other vessels looking for some sign of the Manistee. While pleasant weather continued into the 3rd week of November 1883, a gloom hung over the seafaring community as each day passed, and the fate of the Manistee became more certain in the disaster. November 21st, the Maytham picked up a pail and part of the cabin of the Manistee. The wreckage confirmed the loss of another vessel to a November gale, this one claiming the lives of 38 passengers and crew. The Bayfield Press, November 24th, 1883. All doubts of the fact that the Propeller Manistee went down in the storm on Friday have vanished, in the hope that was indulged in by uncertainty has given place to the sad certainty that the popular boat and her genial officers have embarked on the sealess shores of eternity. 1883. This was Bayfield. 1883 is when the railroad arrived, so you could get to Bayfield on land. You didn't have to go take your life at risk anymore if you didn't want to. But people still came to this area by boat. The Plowboy, 78 feet, built in West Bay, Michigan, rebuilt in 1905. made 2 trips a day between Ashland and Bayfield, stopping at a point, Captain Fred A. Bischoff. It's said to be a staunch little craft that makes 2 trips a day, regular as clockwork and always on time. She is roomy and furnishes delightful moonlight excursions, which are quite the feature of summer society in Ashland. This week, Captain Solomon Butan's Bayfield Fish Company purchased the steamer Plowboy to run between this port and Ashland, meaning Bayfield and Ashland, passengers and freight. The company will use the steamer for picking up fish among the islands and for Sunday and holiday excursions. The purchase price was said to be $3,000. Another view of the Plowboy. I can't go on too far without talking about what my favorite ship among all these is. The Christopher Columbus. I don't know, it's a silly romantic love affair with a vessel, but the only passenger whaleback that was ever constructed. A little bit about her. Built in Superior in 1892 by Alexander McDougall for the World's Columbian Exposition of 1893 in Chicago. And you can see why it was painted white, because the Columbian Exposition of 1893 was known as the White City. You can just imagine what the white Christopher Columbus looked like coming up to this dock and landing passengers. During his lifetime, the Christopher Columbus had 3 accidents. June 1895, an explosion caused by a disconnected steam pipe. July 1905, collided with the schooner Ralph Campbell in the Chicago River. One of the things about the Christopher Columbus, by the way, the shape of it was known as a cigar boat, so they even had cigars, the whaleback cigars. And you could get your pin about Christopher Columbus. June 30th, 1917, being maneuvered by tugs away from the dock in the Milwaukee River, the current caught her, and it started slipping sideways and spinning sideways. Her bow sheared off 2 legs of a water tower, toppling it and flooding the Christopher Columbus's decks with about 25,000 gallons of water. The collision killed 16 people and severely damaged the pilot house, but it was out of service for the rest of the year. But the Christopher Columbus stayed in service until the 1930s. Very long service on the lakes. Only 3 accidents, not too shabby. Eleanor Knight, Bayfield Press, September 25th, 1897. Fully 8,000 excursionists visited Bayfield last Saturday and Sunday. The 2 largest crowds that ever visited Bayfield were landed here last Saturday and closed the most successful season in her existence. Sunday, the Christ landed at the Dalrymple dock with over 2,000 people on board. She remained at the dock, at which time the excursionists took to the sights of our town. Professor Deere, this is Professor Patsy Deere, and I really tried looking for information on Professor Patsy Deere, and I haven't found anything. Made an attempt in his balloon. The balloon was held on the windward side by 15 or 20 men, but when 2/3 inflated, a heavy gust of wind caught it, and piling the men in a heap, the balloon swept the dock, knocking over the hot air it flew, and was set on fire. The men immediately let her go, of the guy ropes, and a large airship blew over them into the water where the flames were extinguished. Considerable excitement prevailed, causing 2 ladies to faint. But fortunately, no one was injured. On Sunday, the balloon being repaired, he made another attempt to fly, this time successfully. It was one of the prettiest aeronautic performances ever given. Apparently, the successful flight, he was a kind of a daredevil, and the way she described it, he was not just hanging on by his hands, and at one point he was hanging on by his teeth below the basket of air. Must have been quite a scene. So this is the Bayfield waterfront around 1897. The tugs and Butan, the Barker, and the Curry at the Booth docks. Another vessel will apply these waters, aptly named the Schwaming. Built in 1902 by the Schwaming Bay Transportation Company at Manitowoc, it was built to replace the Plowboy. At 101 feet, it could carry passengers and cargo. Had a luxurious dining room with upholstered furniture and woodwork, electric lights. The ladies' cabin on the upper deck had a piano and was said to glide through the waters like a swan. Here's the Lucille and the Schwaming and the Eva at the LaPointe dock. The Schwaming, in turn, was replaced a little bit later by the Skater. Schwaming Bay Transportation Company. This is built in 1890 in Detroit, about 86 feet in length. Worked Schwamigan Bay from 1903 to 1920. Skater was the last large boat to operate a ferry out of Ashland. Peerless. The steamer Peerless was in port, said the Bayfield Press of 1903, Monday evening, and unloaded a few hundred freezing pans for the A. Boothett Company to be used for the herring business this fall. The Peerless is an old timer on the lakes, and old settlers recall instances dating back to their arrival here on the boat 20 years ago. Had quite a luxurious harbor, I would say. I love how this curves with the shape of the sheer of the boat. Argo, built 1901 for the Craig shipping line of Toledo, company in Toledo, for the A. Boothett Company. Steel propeller, triple expansion engine, 173 feet in length, designed for passengers, freight, and mail along Lake Superior. Ran for only 2 seasons in this area, and was eventually sold to the French government in 1917 and served until 1938. The Argo had come to Bayfield with the Christopher Columbus in 1897. It was known as a fast, safe, first-class boat. Charles Turner, the general superintendent of the A. Boothett Company, says that negotiations are in progress whereby the steamer Argo will be traded for a speedier craft and one possessed of greater passenger accommodations. The Booth Company, he says, is viewing a plan for circling the shore of Lake Superior with the freight and passenger steamer line by extending the route from Houghton to Sault Ste. Marie to Port Arthur, Ontario. All right, how am I doing at time? I'm getting right to the end. Okay, one more story of a ship. I want to talk about the Hunter. Built in 1877, 110 feet in length, wood propeller, built for the Booth line, and originally used as a very large fishing boat out of Portland, Maine. Rebuilt, brought to Chicago in 1888 to haul passengers and fish. Rebuilt again in 1891 and returned to Duluth. In 1898, ran into a raft of logs and the gale had lost all propeller blades, had to be towed to Duluth. Replaced by larger steamers in 1902 and finally burned at the dock in Michigan, in Grand Marais, Michigan in 1904. On September 6, 1890, the Bayfield Press told this story about how on Tuesday morning the Hunter backed out of the Blue Slip with 53 jolly excursionists aboard. Immediately all formality was dispensed with. Each one gave himself up to keen enjoyment. The spirits of the party rose with the speed of the boat. Paradoxical as it may seem, however, there were absolutely no spirits on board, for the party was chaperoned by Reverend W.H. Morgan. He and Captain Green had made arrangements to have the day perfect for the occasion. The sun was shining brightly, a gentle breeze was blowing scarcely a ripple on the surface of Schwamigan Bay. The party landed at Red Cliff for lunch, and then landed on a sandy beach at Rice's Island, where Reverend Bushnell officiated as the sole devotee of the episcopal sciences. He succeeded after a severe struggle in landing one of the Finnic tribe. After some argument, it was decided that it was not a whale, but a whitefish, and the victim was sent to the cook to be prepared for eating. The trip went to Devil's Island, and several times during the day, the excursionists gathered upon the upper deck and sang college songs, hymns, and rounds. This was by all means the most enjoyable part of the day. The moon had risen before the arrival home. And so perhaps I have demonstrated to you what a wild and woolly place Lake Superior was in the century between 1800 and about 1900. Perhaps it would be fitting conclusion to recite a bit of a poem by William Henry Drummond about one of the wrecks of the period. And perhaps I shall begin with the story of the wreck of the Julia Plant. Now all good scow sailormen, take warning by that storm, and go and marry some nice French girl, and leave on one big farm. The wind can blow like hurricane, and suppose she blows some more. You can't get drowned on Lake St. Pierre so long as you stay on the shore. So long as you stay on the shore.